Hi, I'm Rachel Ward, and I'd like to read from my translation of Tasting Sunlight by Ewald Arenz, which is out this week from Orenda books. They were in the garden before she remembered that there were any apple trees there. But Liss wasn't stopping. She pushed the barrow round the corner of the machine shed where the beehive stood, and it was only now that Sally noticed a narrow path there, between the hedge and the back wall of the shed, almost entirely overgrown with elder bushes. The metal wheelbarrow scraped along the plaster. Grooves scored into the pale grey mortar showed that this wasn't the first time. Just before the other end of the shed, Liss stopped, reached over the barrow and unhooked a garden gate that Sally could barely have made out in the hedge. Liss pushed the wheelbarrow through and had to duck under the branches. Sally followed her and stopped, almost stunned, in the knee-high grass. She'd thought she knew the village around Liss's farm quite well by now. She'd never have believed that an orchard of this size could be hidden behind the neighbouring schoolhouse. And this wasn't just an orchard, it was like a garden in a book. Overgrown, stinging nettles as tall as a man in the corners. Entirely enclosed by hedges, full of flowers and weeds, full of wild, sweet smells. "Shit," she said reverently. "Yes," answered Liss briefly. She used the barrow to plough a path through the tall grass to the first of many pear trees standing in meticulous rows, which looked strange in this wilderness. "Esperance herrenbirne," she said, pointing at the fruit, which didn't really look like pears at all. "Those aren't pears," said Sally as she came closer. "Those are large eggs." Liss made a face. Sally couldn't tell whether or not it was a smile. "That's the lovely thing about nature. It doesn't conform to what we think is right, even if some people try to force it to grow the way they like it. Belgium, 1831. Have a taste." She picked one of the brown striped grey-yellow pears from the branch, took a knife from her pocket, cut a piece off and handed it to Sally. It was yellowish and it felt strangely sweet in her mouth because the grainy flesh melted between her tongue and gums. Liss took the basket from the wheelbarrow pan, threw it into the grass and halted. "Come here," she hissed, suddenly urgent. "Come and see." Sally took a step closer and followed Liss's gaze. She just caught a glimpse of a small snake vanishing into the grass. "No way!" Sally exclaimed between shock and fascination. "Snakes? You've got snakes in your garden?" "Slow worms. They're actually lizards, and they're not dangerous." Then she suddenly laughed. "What?" Sally asked over her shoulder. She was tracking the lizard, cautious but full of curiosity. "There's something symbolic about it," Liss said, bone dry once more. "I give you a pear off the tree and then a slow worm turns up. I just don't know what it symbolises." Sally didn't answer. The slow worm had gone. How nuts was that? She'd never seen a garden like this before. The sun set a swarm of midges dancing and shimmering between the trees. Liss had walked after her and was now standing by a tree that towered over the others. There was low-hanging fruit within reach, but Liss jumped up a little, grabbed a branch and swung herself, pretty skillfully, into the tree, rapidly climbed 2 or 3 metres and then plucked a pear from the sunlit crown. "Here," she said, throwing it to Sally. It was another of those moments. Sally didn't know any adults who just climbed trees like that. She knew adults who exercised, but it was all about sport, a serious business. It wasn't movement to get somewhere, it was movement to be something, slimmer or faster or better, when really they were just going around in one big circle. She'd just picked up the pear when something glinted beside her as it fell, then there was the knife stuck in the ground not half a metre from her shoes. As she climbed down, Liss said, "Cut it through the middle." The fruit was heavy and warm from the sun. Sally bent, pulled the knife out of the ground and wiped it on her bare legs. Then she cut through the pear. "Wow," she said. It was like opening up a rare flower, The seeds lay gleaming black-brown in bright red chambers. Around them, like a bed, was white flesh, surrounded in turn by a rose-red bell. A slender white dash ran down from the stem, dividing it, and it was all inside a thin, warm, reddish-brown shell. "I've never seen anything like it," said Sally. "A blood pear," said Liss, once she was back on the ground. "Nobody knows how long they've been around. Try." Sally cut off a larger piece this time. She wanted to taste the red and the white. It was hard to find a word for the way this pear felt in her mouth, firm yet melting. And she thought the red tasted sweeter, and that there was a tiny taste of bitterness in the white, and that together it was a taste that maybe sunlight would taste like that after a long summer, if it fell through the distant blue of the sky, and then the ancient green of tall trees and landed right on your tongue. "Want some?" she asked, offering Liss half. She shook her head. "I prefer others."